support men's mental well-being. My name is Lisa Meekum. I'm a volunteer with Families for Depression Awareness, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. I'm a person with lived experience of depression and have been a caregiver for others experiencing depression and bipolar disorder. We're so glad to have you here with us for our panel, How Families Can Support Men's Mental Well-Being. Thank you to those joining live and those watching the replay of this video later. To give you a little overview of our program together, in a minute, I will introduce our expert panelists. During the conversation, we encourage you to share your questions or comments in the chat throughout the discussion. We will weave in your questions when we can. This program is being recorded and will be available to watch immediately after it airs. Finally, we remind you that we are doing a survey to evaluate our program. So if you can stick around after our presentation, please do fill out the survey so that we can improve our programs in the future. I would love to tell you a little bit about Families for Depression Awareness. Our mission is to help families recognize and cope with depression and bipolar disorder, to get people well and prevent suicides. Our philosophy is that when a person is living with depression or bipolar disorder, it's the people around them. It's the parents, the siblings, the grandparents, the friends, all of those people in their lives that have a strong and powerful position to support that loved one. Yet caregivers don't always know what to do. And that's where Families for Depression Awareness comes in. We provide education, training, and support specifically geared towards family caregivers so that they can be a strong advocate for their loved ones. They can be a partner in care, and most importantly, so that we can support family units, because that's what we really believe helps to improve health outcomes. The hub of our resources is our website, familyaware.org, which some of you may have already visited. But if you have not yet had the chance, please go to our website and you will see other webinars and workshops that we've had in the past and ones that are coming up in the future. We encourage you to use our web tools, such as our depression and bipolar screening test and our caregiver stress test. We also have a mental health family tree tool on our website, and you can find loads of other resources, including family stories and expert interviews. So we encourage you to visit familyaware.org for more information and resources for family caregivers. The QR code on this slide goes to our newsletter sign up. Before we launch into our discussion, we want to thank our funders, Lundbeck, Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine, and Sage Therapeutics and Biogen for supporting this program. And then, of course, people like you who donate to us. You believe in our mission, believe in our cause. And if you are one of those people who have given us a financial contribution so that we can provide programming for free on issues of depression and bipolar disorder and how they affect families, we thank you. We appreciate you. I would like to introduce our experts for our discussion. Joseph Conrad is a creative entrepreneur and a digital health pioneer, and he believes that the power of innovation and technology can solve any problem. He is the founder and CEO at Grit Digital Health, a team of specialists in behavioral health, wellness, technology, and marketing committed to transcending barriers like stigma and access to help people get the support they need when and how they need it. Joe and his team are the creators of Man Therapy, an innovative and award-winning campaign that uses humor to engage working-age men and an immersive, entertaining digital experience where therapy actually happens. In 2016, Grit Digital Health, in a partnership with Colorado State University, launched You at College, a personal and customized well-being portal that helps students navigate life and campus. Today, the U platform is on 55 campuses across the US. Dr. Jody Fry, PhD, LCSWC, CEAP, is a full professor and Associate Dean for Research at University of Maryland School of Social Work. She is the founder and faculty executive director of the Center for Behavioral Health and Wellbeing Research. For almost 20 years, Dr. Fry's research focuses on adult and emerging adult behavioral health and well-being, with an emphasis on suicide prevention, mental health, substance use, the workplace, and social determinants of health. She has published over 100 articles, books, and book chapters, in addition to presenting research at international conferences and receiving numerous awards for her research and teaching. Dr. Fry co-chairs the Workplace Suicide Prevention and Postvention Committee, where she is working with the committee to disseminate the national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention. And Eric Robinson, co-founder of Building A Refuge. Eric faced life-changing events that have fed his desire to help men who are hurting. After a suicide attempt in 2010, Eric was left searching for hope, and he found it in community. This community developed into Building a Refuge in 2018. Currently residing in Fort Collins, Colorado, Eric's purpose is to assist men through their dark times and introduce them to hope. Welcome to all of you. We're so thankful that you're here to talk with us about this incredibly important topic. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions. Joe, I'll direct this first one at you.
Okay.
What are some of the unique challenges men face when it comes to seeking help for mental health concerns?
Men, so many challenges, so little time, it seems. We are a complex species, but we're also, I think, very simple, and it's deeply rooted. And I think the big thing is that men are just accustomed to trying to figure it out for themselves. And if they don't understand it, they just kind of shut it out and shut it down. We don't like to go to the doctors, even if we're in physical pain. I've seen, I know myself, but even my dad, would go with broken ribs for days before going to the doctor. So, even when we're in acute pain, there's just not a willingness to go to the doctor and to seek help. And I think another one that is just a real barrier is a lack of understanding of what mental health is. Mm-hmm. And, an awareness of what's going on in their life and connecting the dots, realizing that it could be, a mental health issue that's showing up as something else in their life. So just a lack of awareness and self-understanding and knowledge of mental health topics and issues and things that they may be dealing with. I think another area is just not really knowing what therapy is or how therapy works, or that therapy is accessible to them and that therapy comes in many forms. So I think it's just a misunderstanding or a misperception perhaps of what therapy is, and that it doesn't just mean sitting down or laying on a couch and bearing your soul to a therapist. There's a lot of different things that you can do. And so it's not an all or nothing. And I think this is changing in men. I think every generation, I think younger men these days, while they have a number of issues that they're also wrestling with, when it comes to seeking help or therapy, I think that stigma is melting away a little bit. I think that's a good sign. We haven't reached the tipping point in society. When you look at working age men, 25 to 64, I think there's still that stigma of relying on myself, not showing weakness, not asking for help. But I think it's just a lack of understanding and awareness, and really knowing where to turn and where to start and how to get engaged. So I think those are maybe some of the big things that come to mind. But Jody and Eric probably have some light to shed on that as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot connected to knowing about seeking help and all of the different barriers that individuals face. And some are more unique or common amongst men than others. And I think another part to think about building on, the foundation that you offered, Joe, is thinking about how the structures in society also increase that stigma and build up the barriers to seeking help, even when somebody wants to seek help. I think about some of the male-dominated workplaces where I do some of my research, for example, in construction or in manufacturing. And even when someone recognizes that perhaps help is available and change is possible, a lot of times the norms and the way that we're socialized, it continues to beat in that idea that seeking help is a sign of weakness. And so I think there is really a number of layers of that stigma to unpack. And I agree with you, the generational shift is definitely happening and encouraging. And I think about my own kids who are, in their preteens, and they talk about counseling and medication for support when needed all the time. And it's like the stigma is completely gone.
Yeah.
From even my generation and of course generations ahead of mine. So I'm really encouraged to look at those changes over time. And I think making sure that the counseling then is responsive to the needs that people have, and men might be looking for some different things than some other folks that might be seeking counseling. We want to make sure the whole system is responding and there to respond when someone reaches out.
Yeah, Joe and Jody, I think you both hit the nail on the head with that one. It's a generational thing, I think. I'm 51 years old, and in my organization, my co-founder, he's 53, and so we were of that generation where if we fell down, your dad dusted you off and said get back in there, and it's utilizing those types of that kind of background of having that kind of dust yourself off, figure it out on your own. That type of thing. In our organization, when we first started, we had a bunch of guys that were my age, and we just hungered for younger guys to come into our organization. We tried to get guys in, and as they started to come in, you started to see that. You started to see the younger generation actually be like, it's kind of weird that you guys approach things that way. And it's a refreshing way of looking at things. It's a refreshing way of just having it come across, and to be in a room of other men, your peers, who don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing to watch as these younger, as we get the word out, as we caregiving and all those things, as that is defined a little bit better for us older guys, it becomes a little bit less painful to talk about.
That's really important. Joe, what strategies have you found most effective in breaking down stigma and engaging men in conversations about mental health?
Yeah, that was the biggest challenge that we faced when we developed the Man Therapy campaign. We were asked to take on the issue of suicide among working age men here in Colorado. That was in 2011 when it started, and we launched Man Therapy in 2012. And, when we launched that campaign, we approached it from a marketing, advertising, and branding perspective. And, we really tried to use crystal clear insights to understand, how people believe and behave and how we can shift that and what is our way in. And we had a few key insights. And one was that if we wait until a guy was in crisis, we were going to be way too late. Because unfortunately, when a man attempts suicide, he usually is successful the first time. So we knew we wanted to be earlier than that, right? Early intervention, prevention. So it really became a men's mental health campaign. And at that moment, I had an epiphany. And it's that, we weren't building Man Therapy for just some men. We were building it for each and every single man out there. So no matter who you are, you're somewhere on that continuum of mental health and well-being. And you never know, you may be doing great, and then something happens in your life and it puts you in a tough spot. And are you resilient enough to be able to deal with that? So you never really know throughout your journey where you're going to be on that continuum. And so we like to really take an approach that mental health is for everyone. And I think when you look at it that way, the stigma just melts away, because it's something that we're all thinking about. And we ask people to look in the mirror and ask yourself, like, where are you? What are you dealing with? Like, what does it mean to you? Let's personalize that, because we can all relate to it somehow, some way. So I think that's the big thing that we've been focused on, is kind of breaking through the stigma by normalizing it. And then we also, use humor a great deal. And Jody knows that this is one of the secret ingredients of man therapy, is if you can get a guy to laugh, they might lean in and start listening more, and you'll get their attention. Guys also use humor to deflect. Those of you that know men or living with them will use humor to deflect a serious topic that they would rather not talk about. So we are using humor in reverse to kind of get them to open up and get their attention. But then the other things that we're doing is talking to guys the way they talk to one another, and make therapy more approachable. If we want to break down those barriers, we need to just, talk to guys, and, they don't want to see the old head in hand, wife consoling PSAs of the past. And so we try to have a fresh approach, like, hey, we're just going to give it to you straight. Here's the information that you need. Here's some tools that you can use to fix yourself. There's a lot of different options when it comes to getting help. It doesn't come in one size. We meet men where they are. And I think those strategies, and also doing it in a digital platform that's anonymous and confidential, that they can do on their own. So I think those are some of the ingredients that have helped us break through and connect with men.
That's great. Yeah, I took a look at your website, and I really was, it does all these things you just said. I was blown away by the approach. I think it's wonderful.
Cool, thank you.
Dr. Fry, how about you? What strategies do you guys see on the science side of things for this?
Sure. Yeah. For the past 10 years, I've had the privilege to work with man therapy as a researcher. And I was introduced to man therapy in my role as a co-chair on the Workplace Suicide Prevention Committee with one of the man therapy creators, Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas, who worked with Joe and the folks at Grit Digital in Colorado. And we knew people were using it, but we didn't know, like, does it work? And to be totally honest, and I think Joe knows this, like, I didn't necessarily think all of it was that funny. I'm trained as a clinical social worker. I'm not trained to think about using humor when I'm doing suicide assessment and trying to engage people. So I came in, I think, as a skeptical researcher over a decade ago, and but I saw just thousands and now millions of people going to the site and expressing satisfaction and talking about connecting to resources. So we were really lucky back in 2014 to get the first randomized control trial, which is kind of the gold standard of research out there. It's hard to do. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention funded our team to test this in the state of Michigan. And so we had a wonderful opportunity to do a statewide men's mental health suicide prevention campaign in a place where they could access man therapy. Anyone can access mantherapy.org free anytime, but they weren't actively promoting it. So we knew we would have an audience that was new for the most part. And so we were able to actually test the use of man therapy in research throughout the state. We had over 550 men that enrolled in the study, which, let me just tell you, enrolling men in an online suicide and depression study to do surveys to pay them very little with a gift card is really hard.
Wow.
So one of the first takeaways we learned was, how in the world do we even get men to come to this site? Because we were working with folks to, think about talking about depression and mental illness, and nobody was coming. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose this grant. So we leaned into really the humor in man therapy as a way to recruit and bring people into the study to then test out the site. And once we leaned into the folks that understand how to speak and connect with men wherever they might be in the community and not talk just mental health and mental illness and treatment, once we opened it up to normalize, we had people coming by the thousands to the site, men and women, that were curious and interested. And then we were able to have a very large study. And we found that people who do online suicide prevention, suicide screening, mental health, that they actually can improve over time. We had a 3-month follow-up. And across, both the samples in our study, we saw reductions in depression and suicidal ideology. But for men in particular that used man therapy, we saw increased social support, increased treatment motivation, and increased behaviors of help seeking. And I always say, despite the name man therapy, it's not a replacement for therapy. When I talk about it's that bridge to, as Joe said, to open the door in the conversation, to break down those barriers so that people start talking about what's going on in their life and are able to learn from people that look like them, talk like them, recommend programs as a friend, a peer. They use the resources. So from that early study, we found that all of the techniques built into man therapy actually lead to behavior change of making appointments with counselors for people who've never thought of doing therapy, making and talking to their primary care doctor about suicide risk, and going to online support groups. So you can probably hear it in my voice, but over the past 10 years, I've become a fan of man therapy. And we've, been really blessed to have additional funding through CDC and expand our work from Michigan over 10 years now into Ohio. And they're doing just some great partnership building with communities to think about how do we get this in the hands of everybody? We don't want to wait for men to go to the mental health counselor to introduce them to this. We want it in the restaurants, the fraternities, the barbershops. And so those types of methods really normalize help seeking for men and plants a seed that, if I need to learn some information about this or I need to connect with help, because I think that's an important part to mention to your audience is that the crisis and suicide lines are built into the website. And so the number of people connecting to 988 through our man therapy campaigns is astounding. We know we're reaching men at higher risk that are not connected in other ways to any kind of support system. So I've definitely been won over by the data and the research, and we continue to expand that work to think about how man therapy can have an impact on older men, for example, as we're doing some work now, and also maybe challenging those masculinity norms in our community that often prevent folks from seeking help.
Wow, that's amazing. Eric, do you have anything to add from a lived experience about strategies that have been effective in breaking down some of these barriers?
Well, I just want to say one thing. Jody put it beautifully and technically and clinically. I will say this. I was a consumer of man therapy before we started my organization.
Wow.
And it works. It works. That's all I have to say to that. But thank you, Joe, because it works.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
And I think Jody has been a wonderful partner, her and her team, and I'm glad that she was a skeptic coming in. I think that makes for the best research protocol and methodology, but she's been great to work with. And I think one thing that she alluded to that came out of the findings of the research that we weren't anticipating is the use, because we were just testing the website as an intervention. If you went and used mantherapy.org, what happens? That was the clinical study. Mm-hmm. But we couldn't recruit enough people to fill the study, so we used our man therapy recruitment materials. And I think that's really the secret, right? That it's not a lack of resources necessarily. It's about connecting men to the right resources at the right time. And man therapy is really that upper funnel that gets guys' attention and then points them to the right resource at the right time. So it's just using the campaign is actually, that's a big part of the findings is of how to talk to men differently. You can get results. You can be effective if you kind of break through the traditional way and use some modern techniques to connect with men.
And one of the things where we've been able to utilize as an organization has been, when you're referring and you're talking to 15 guys in a room and they all have their own specific situation that they're going through, you got to tell this guy to go to this place, this guy to go to that place, this guy to go to that website. And it's like, no, we didn't have to do that. We go to man therapy. There's resources there after resources after resources. And we literally, I think every person who has come through Building a Refuge, we've referred them to man therapy.
It's amazing.
Wow. Such an important resource. Well, let's move on to talking about families. And Dr. Fry, I'll start with you on this one. How can family members create a supportive environment that encourages men to open up about their struggles?
Yeah, this is a question that we get a lot, especially from partners thinking about man therapy, but other resources too. Like, what do we use? What tools are out there? And families are often the first line of prevention and intervention, but they don't always feel like they have the skills or the knowledge to say the right thing. How to start the conversation, and I think creating a culture. I talked about culture in the workplace, but a culture at home where there's true connection, where there's patience to have authentic conversations and to plant seeds, recognizing that first time that you ask someone who maybe is struggling, they might not want to open up and talk to you right away, but letting them know that you're concerned, you're worried about someone, how are you managing the stress going on at work, or maybe something happening with your kids and the family, that plants a seed so that as someone's thinking about, should I tell you what I'm thinking? Should I, how are you going to respond? Are you going to see me as weak? Are you going to see me differently if I share something that's making me feel vulnerable, or it's making me feel hopeless, or making me feel embarrassed? We want to make sure that the conversation is genuine, and that we're not approaching someone with demands. I do hear from men who use man therapy, that they've been given ultimatums by someone in their family to go to counseling, or, I'm also trained as a clinical therapist and started my career at NASA in a male-dominated workplace. And I had clients who would say, my wife's going to leave me, like, if I don't do this counseling. The counseling needs to be the right fit. And what you find is that it's the conversations are not there. It's like having different conversations amongst people. They're just not conversing in a way that is helpful. They're, sometimes when we think about, how men might show or feel depression, sometimes it can be more like anger or impulsiveness. And it's not always how we think about someone who's depressed, where we describe someone as sad or feeling blue. And so we don't respond to someone who's angry the same way that we respond to someone who looks sad. And so I think it's important for families to be patient and non-judgmental, and to normalize, that seeking help and accepting help is okay. And not just okay, but a sign of strength. And I know, for women also in particular, they often tell us that they go to man therapy to learn strategies on how to talk to the men they care about in their life, because what they've been doing isn't working, and it's building up more walls and more anger. And so we have, people of all genders that use this site to really think about, how can I support other people? And so I think looking for those changes, those signs, those patterns that, indicate something's different. You're not going to plant an idea in someone's head if you ask them, are you okay? It seems like you're stressed. Talk to me. And even asking, are you thinking of suicidal thoughts? Like, that's a myth that's out there still, that if we ask direct questions about suicide, we're going to somehow give this idea to someone. And actually what we're doing is letting a person know who might be having suicidal thoughts, it's okay for you to talk to me about it. I'm a trustful person. And so I think for families, creating an environment, and you don't have to be perfect to be a caring family member or a caring friend. You just have to be there for the person and open the door for conversation, and the rest can happen naturally. So I always recommend, put yourself out there and check in on people you care about, because if we notice a change, we notice someone struggling, like, why would we not ask questions about how they're doing and be there to help them?
Jody, that's amazing advice. You were just dropping, I think, some really wonderful wisdom, and I think caregivers, it's an important message for them to receive. I think everything you said, I could not agree more with. The other thing that we realize as a way in is the caregivers, but it's specifically in talking to men about men's mental health, it's the women in their lives. So the moms, the wives, the daughters, the sisters, and even friends, they can really be a catalyst for getting somebody to take that next step. And we found that I think at least half of the visitors to man therapy are indeed women, and they're coming looking for information about the man in their life that they care about or are worried about. So we really blew out and added a lot of content to our worried about someone section to really, provide a lot of advice and give some tools and resources to those caregivers that might be worried about the guy in their life and ways to approach them. And it's a lot of what Jody summarized.
That's really interesting statistic that you had, Joe, because in our organization, we're a face-to-face community-based organization. So our online presence is you, Joe. And so on our end, we have found that over half of the guys that have been referred to our organization have been referred to by their wives or a family member. And in most situations, it is that family member is at their wit's end and didn't know where to go, didn't know where to turn. And so they found out about us and they referred them to us. And that's a great lead in when we're talking about that, because most of the guys in the room can relate to spousal difficulties while they're going through their dark times.
Yeah.
And so when they come in the room and they've been referred, like that's almost like the easiest conversation starter in the world. It's like, oh yeah, well, here's what I've been dealing with, or here's what I'm going through, and it's like it's just an easy lead in. And so that's really interesting, Joe. With the number of people that visit your site, that you're finding that statistic to be the same, because it's holding true on the community side as well.
It's good, interesting to know.
Yeah.
We've got a question here in the chat that I think is related to this and helpful to talk about from Sophia. She says, but depression itself can prevent connection. And our discussion seems unaware of how difficult it is to find a good therapist. So continuing to talk about this family space, are there other ways that we can broach the conversation, or really practical ways, especially Jody, as you mentioned, if anger is sometimes appearing as a first line of defense?
Yeah, thank you, Sophia, for the question. Actually, I think there might be two questions in there. So
Yes.
I'll try to tackle a little bit of both, and then my co-presenters can jump in. So depression, as I mentioned, does look and feel different for different people. And a lot of times men, a lot of times men talk about depression. Sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. Talk about it in more a physical reaction. And so sometimes depression looks like anger or irritability or stress. But
Judy, I'll give you a break.
I'm going to take a sip of water.
I've heard.
We all have colds.
I got a great hack. If you have a mint, some sort of a mint, apparently it'll go right away. Handy. But just to give you a chance to recover from that, I know what that tickle is like. Signs of. Can you put the question back up again? It was about the first part.
Yeah, I think it's how difficult it can be to connect, to even broach a conversation or have the conversation with someone who's, experiencing depression.
Yeah. It definitely is a difficult conversation. And I think that you don't have to have all the answers. You're most likely the caregiver is not a trained clinician and, doesn't need to be an expert at that. I think what Jody was getting at are like, what are some things that you can broach, or how can you open up that topic and try to make that connection with somebody who may be in a pretty dark place where they're not being receptive. It's a challenge. I don't think there's any magic solution to that. And it's just depending on the situation, I think you just have to try to show that you care and try to, get them to open up a little bit, and then, go do some work together. Try to offer to, go on a website or go look for resources together with them. But, I think you just have to keep looking for a way in to get a foothold somehow.
Yeah, I think I'm recovered. So we'll see how my voice holds up. So I agree. It is very challenging, especially if you've tried multiple times for someone that's struggling perhaps with depression or suicidal thoughts to open up the conversation. And I often find that asking how someone feels is like a jump ahead, and so a lot of times I'll start with a more factual approach. Tell me about your day. You've had a lot on your plate lately. Like, how did things go today? And people can tell more about facts or other people before they go into themselves. It's a little safer to test the waters and also to see, like, do I want to talk about this right now? And then I often move into, like, what kind of thoughts did you have when that happened with your boss, or, this happened on the ride home? Thoughts are easier to talk about for people, especially men tell me that it's easier to connect with what they were thinking before moving into their feelings, especially for someone that's not sure, I want to share this, I'm concerned how you might respond, or I just have never talked about it before. It might be something new. And so you might need to have those conversations that don't go as deep into, like, what's happening with a depression or anxiety or a mix of both of these, as a place to start moving into that conversation. And as Joe said, like, most of the folks, I think I might be the only clinician on the call. Like, most of us are not clinically trained, and we shouldn't be doing counseling. What we're trying to do is to build connection so that we can then say, I saw this website. Would you look at it with me? I thought there were some things on there that hit some good points and it was kind of funny. Could we look at it together? And so you want to enter the conversation slowly. And being patient, it takes time for someone, even your spouse, even your parent, even someone very close to you, to share what might be the worst thoughts they've ever had. It could be the worst day of their life, and they're not sure what to do about this. So I think being really patient and recognizing that when someone's depressed and doesn't want to open up, they still hear you and they see you as a support. Or if they're angry and irritable and they're expressing depression differently, again, we're planting those seeds to let someone know help's available when they're ready. We can't force someone to go to counseling and get benefit out of this, but we can continue to be present in someone's life. And I'll address the second part of the question in a minute, but just curious if others have some thoughts about that, because it is challenging.
Well, so Sophia, I'll address this from a personal standpoint as one who received that care. One of the things, I tell this in my story a lot, one of the things that was most beneficial to me when I was going through my dark time, and I didn't even know it at the time, I didn't know this until several months, even a year afterwards, was my wife would sit down and just say, "Hey, how can I help you today?" That's it. It's a simple question. How can I be there for you today? And if I was at a point where I was in an angry situation, because unfortunately for me, that's how I expressed my depression, was through anger and frustration and just not knowing what was going on in my mind and in my head and my heart. And there were times where I just said, I nothing. But there were also those times where she was persistent and came back and said, "Hey, how can I help you?" She left me alone in that time where I said nothing. But in the time when I said, I was open to that and my heart was opening to listening to her and actually talking to her about it, that was something that was like, it opened doors that I probably wouldn't have got to had she not come at me that way. She came at me in a very caring and loving way, but persistent. So that's how I received it the best, and that's my own personal story. So.
That's so important, Eric. Thank you. Jody, and I don't know if we're going to get to this in another question, but you did want to address the second part of Sophia's question about how difficult it can be to find therapy and a good therapist.
I couldn't agree more. I don't know if the audience is all US based or international, but I'll just speak within the US where I am. The system of accessing care is so challenging and just seems to be getting more and more challenged and inaccessible. I know as an advocate for mental health services and access and parity, I'm constantly, writing letters and speaking and pushing, for a more open, accessible system. But the reality is, without financial support, without flexibility in your job, and depending on how much access you might have to telehealth, you might be waiting for some time to connect with a therapist. And then hopefully that therapist is a good fit, right? Because not every counselor is going to be a great fit for every individual. So letting someone know that there are resources out there, Man Therapy's one, there's certainly others. 988, I think, is a really important resource to remember when you're in crisis and you're not in care yet, or you're finding the right counselor, the right fit, to have other resources, other tools in your toolbox to use, because it does take some time. I think, the availability of telemental health and doing remote counseling has opened up a lot of doors for folks to seek counseling with people that they want to work with that may not live in their community or be within like a 10-mile radius. So exploring what options there are. But we also have folks in our study that use peer support, that will access help through their workplace in an employee assistance program or a union-based program. They will go and talk with faith-based leaders who have mental health counseling. So there are other options within communities to think about where counseling services can be helpful, as well as talking to your primary care doctor. I do a lot of work advocating for more screening and services in primary care and support for primary care doctors to be able to do this work, because they have a lot to manage within their practice. But bringing that up to someone that you trust as a health professional, even if they're not a mental health counselor, sometimes that can open some doors for referrals and at least some crisis services if needed while you're waiting to get into perhaps longer term counseling. But I don't want to minimize that it is a challenge right now. And I appreciate the question and the patience of being with someone while they're trying to seek help.
I think I'd like to just add, Eric alluded to the fact that everybody's journey is unique, of how, you became depressed and what fed into that, and what you're struggling and dealing with now specifically. And the way out is going to be different for different people. And it's not always just going to a counselor. There's non-traditional outlets for that. And when I talk about getting a foothold, it could be something that's just about getting outside and going for a walk, or volunteering. We have a friend here in Colorado, a good friend of mine, who was manically depressed, tried a number of different things, nothing worked. And then someone took him to a volunteer experience. And it was like the veil just lifted on his depression, almost like magically, because he was doing something purposeful in service to others. And for him, it's what he needed. And a light bulb went on, and he started an organization called Project Helping. And they connect people of all ages to projects around the country, and doing different service-oriented programs. And he's expanded, and he started a nonprofit that's booming all around this idea. There's another partner called Fishing the Good Fight that takes guys on fishing trips. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, and not knowing, each individual situation, like, try to figure out for this person that I care about, like, what's a way in? What do they like? How can I get a start? And there could be some, a lot of resources that you can find on Man Therapy. We also launched a therapist directory. We also found a real issue with trying to find therapists who are specialized and are passionate about working with men. And so we've launched that. It's still in its early stages, but we've got a good crop of physicians. And on January 1st, we're going to open it up for free to physicians and clinicians. Right now, we're charging a small fee, and we've decided just to open it up and just be that clearinghouse for finding qualified physicians in your area.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I love that you said that, Joe, because there are alternatives. There are all things out there. I think the way that I look at it, there's this pie, right? And there's each piece of that pie is integral to your recovery, to getting help. And a clinician is definitely one of them. For me and my personal story, it was just getting outside. It was getting outside and discovering my purpose again. And one of the people that came alongside of me helped me to discover that. And that was I've had 4 caregivers in my recovery time. And so each one of those people shares a different part of my story. And one of them was the one that helped me to redefine my purpose. And to get me back out into activities that got my mind away from the struggles and some of the things. Not that I didn't have to deal with those. That's the piece of the pie where you go and talk to a qualified clinician. That not that you sweep those under the carpet and don't deal with them, but it gives you an opportunity to just find peace and find joy again, to go out and find your purpose. So I encourage you, Sophia, to not only seek, the traditional types of things, but find out, your loved one, find out what they used to love to do. Did they love to go out and play catch in the yard? Did they love to go hiking? Did they love to go, ride Harleys? That was my thing. And so get out and do that. Just go do that. And that is the thing that we encourage the most. And that's the piece of the puzzle that individual has to do. They have to make a decision to change. And that's what we ask in our organization is just make a decision, just one decision. If it's get up and make your bed, there's purpose in that. If it's get up and go for a walk, there's purpose in that. And it refocuses their mind away from the darkness that they're in.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thanks for all those incredible answers. And thank you, Sophia, for your comment. We have another comment here that I'm going to work into our next question. Aaron says, I never put together the anger with depression. Thank you for that. That sheds some light on issues with my son. Is it common that the anger is directed mainly to a particular person? So we're going to talk now about how depression symptoms may look different in men than in women. And so, Dr. Fry, why don't we start with you, and then if you can address the anger and if it's directed at one person or the other in particular, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that men are not a homogeneous group. There's a lot of different shades of how people experience life and respond and react. So we're going to talk about some gross generalizations here, but I think there are important characteristics to look for anyone, regardless of gender. But a lot of times we do see changes in behavior patterns and changes in character as a warning sign with men. And so I think it, not to go all academic, I think it was Sigmund Freud who said, that depression is anger turned inward. And so if you think about that, that always stuck with me. I've in my private practice before becoming a professor, I worked with a lot of men, who were very angry and often getting themselves in trouble with their anger at work and at home, which often landed them in my office, not because they wanted to be there. And it really took a lot of time to build trust and rapport to kind of peel back the onion of what's at the core of the anger. The anger is a symptom. The anger is a way of releasing energy. And a lot of times, not always, I will tell you, sometimes people just are very angry and they could be very angry at someone else. But a lot of times they're just very angry at their life. And when you think about what are the risk factors for suicide, some of the biggest risk factors, in addition to depression, are feeling hopeless and feeling like a burden on other people. And so if you take those two characteristics that really increase risk for suicide and integrate that with these norms in society of what it means to be a burden. If I can't provide for myself, for my family, the economic instability, or as Eric, mentioned, the relationship challenges are so common when you see men who are struggling, and they often respond as very irritable and angry or impulsive. Sometimes we'll see men trying to manage this pain inside with substances, using more alcohol, using drugs, or risky behaviors like gambling, or thinking about driving really fast, not following rules, as a way to try to cope with a lot of times the depression and the anxiety that's underneath what we're seeing on the surface. So it's not always, but a lot of times depression is expressed and understood differently. In my research, in the study I mentioned earlier, there were about 12% of men out of that 550 men sample that had no symptoms of depression on a traditional depression scale that we would use at a doctor's office. But they had active suicidal ideation, and they scored at moderate or high risk for anger and irritability. So depression is by far the leading, risk factor in suicide, but we can't ignore that not everybody experiences and understands depression the same. Now, whether that anger is directed to one person, to other people, I noticed there was a parent-child relationship there. So kind of outside of this topic, but perhaps relevant to your audience and your organization, a lot of times our kids have that letdown, if they're school age or even if they're emerging adults, and they are angry with the people they feel safest with. And so as parents, we are often the brunt and the receiver of those emotions, and the big emotions, which can be anger. So could someone be directing that, be angry at one person? Sure. And that's something to manage and talk about. But anger at oneself, where does it go, right? Like a lot of times, because we're not able to intervene earlier, men will suffer in silence and eventually it explodes. You cannot keep that in forever. And so how that comes out can look really differently with different people. So, changes in behavior, anger and impulsivity, risk-taking, and physical descriptions of depression are often signs that men share. Feeling super tired, fatigue, not doing the activities that they normally have been able to engage in. Those are very common complaints and observations about depression with men.
Joe or Eric, would you guys like to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I think Jody put it very well that, and it is very difficult in a forum like this to talk in general terms, because that's the beautiful and the most frustrating thing about mental health is that everybody has their own story. I will tell you this, and I alluded to it before, that was my main way of showing my depression was through anger and just irritability and just frustrated all the time. And I think, unfortunately, we aim that anger and frustration at the people who are closest and nearest to us on a daily basis. So, and Lisa, I apologize. What was the gentleman's name who asked the question?
Oh, Aaron.
Aaron. So if that is a concern with your son, and I apologize, Aaron might be mom or the dad. I'm not really sure. I apologize, but if they're aiming it at you, it's because you're the closest and you're the nearest. It would be my assumption, and I hesitate to say back away from it a little bit, because there might not be anybody else in that picture, and this is the downfall of not knowing the full story of the question, but understanding and knowing that they're angry and you're seeing that anger because you're there and you're present. And I would continue to encourage you to be present and to be just let them know you love them and you're there. That's the best I can give you in that general term.
Thank you, Eric. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to share on this before we move to our last question?
I don't know. I think that
Okay.
Jody and Eric gave some great advice there.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, Eric, I'm going to turn to you to start us off with our last question.
Yeah.
How can caregivers maintain a balance between showing support and respecting autonomy when encouraging the men in their lives to seek professional help?
So it's been interesting hearing, some of the comments, that Joe and Jody have offered, just about speaking in general terms and understanding and knowing that everybody has their own specific story and instance and situations that brought them to where they're at, not only with the person who's suffering, but also the caregiver. And so before I answer the question, I just want to acknowledge the caregivers who are listening to this. I want to acknowledge them for being here, for seeking out information, for trying to seek to understand the people that they love, because that is a difficult thing, not only with people in general, but especially with men. Jody alluded to it a few times. We are unique in the fact that we don't offer up a lot. We don't. We cover up things. We don't really allow people in when we're struggling. And so I just want to encourage the caregivers that are in the audience that what you're doing by being present and by seeking the information is the best thing that you can do for your loved one right now. They may or may not receive it at the time, but just know that you're planting a seed for not only now, but in the future, that they will see and they will acknowledge that at some point in time. And I am a perfect living example of the fact that when someone sticks with you and is persistent with you, my wife and I went through some very difficult times, and we're married, and we celebrated 26 years of marriage. So the things that you are offering them now will plant seeds and will prosper in the future. I promise you. The first thing that like when it comes to caregiving, in my experience, I was offered one of my first caregiver. I alluded earlier to having 4 caregivers in my life, and the first one was a guy that I hadn't seen in 3 years. His name was Doug, and I, by happenstance, saw him when I was at my darkest day, and that was the morning that I attempted my life. I saw him in the afternoon, and for 3 hours, Doug allowed me to just literally puke up everything that I was thinking, feeling, hearing in my mind, and that I wasn't able to tell others. And he just sat and listened. I think in 3 hours, he probably said 10 words. And at that time, when I was in that moment, that's what I needed. And that's why when I answered one of the questions earlier, I was talking about my wife and how she offered that gentle approach to come in and say, hey, how can I help you today? Or how can I be there for you right now? And there are times where I've said, not now, honey, I don't, and sometimes a lot meaner than that. But there are times where she gave that olive branch and I took it and we talked. And so you're never going to know as a caregiver when that time is coming, where they're going to just unload on you. And the one thing that I can say is that by being present, my hope is that day will come for your loved one. One of the things that I don't think that we've talked about is acknowledging the pain that they're going through. The thing that I'll refer to him as caregiver number 3 did was he was able to, because he was a peer, he was able to empathize with what I was going through because he had a shared experience. It wasn't exactly like my experience, but it was something that was similar. And so he acknowledged my pain. He acknowledged what I was going through. He acknowledged the fact that He knew what I was struggling with. He knew what I was going through. Again, he didn't know specifically what it was, but he understood that gut wrenching feeling, that the darkness, the pain that I was feeling in my brain and in my head and in my heart. And so, um, I just want, and there's different ways to do that. I guess there's different ways. You can affirm it by verbally affirming it. You can affirm it by just your body language of showing them that you care by touch. And some people like that. Some people don't. A hug. I didn't want any part of hugs in the beginning. Now I can't get enough. And so it's like, and then just expressing your desire that you want to be there. Like, I really, truly want to sit beside you and ride this thing out with you. And then just knowing that's a battle within itself for the guy who's going through the struggle, because the darkness that he's in, he's all by himself. No one's ever gone through what he's going through right now. But if they've got somebody that is always there, who's consistently there, who wants to be there, that's a huge thing. And that's a big battle that we face in our own minds. The other thing is, and we've talked about this quite a bit, but seeking out help for them. Jody alluded to it. Joe alluded to it. There's many forms of help. When I was going through my struggles, and my story is irrelevant at this point, but like I knew two things. One, I was either going to get locked up or I was going to get put in a rubber room somewhere. And that's just not realistic. That's not, that might've been, 40 years ago, but today there's so much out there, people just don't know about it. And so I would encourage you to go visit sites like Man Therapy that have sources and resources that are out there for many different types of situations. I alluded to it earlier. My thing was having people come alongside of me to help me find my purpose. And mine just happened to be Harleys and snowmobiles. And it was like, they helped me get back into those activities. And I will tell you this, it was the hardest freaking thing I've ever done in my life, because like that pain and that depression, it zaps you of every bit of energy that you have. And so that's the piece that we talk about in our organization, is you have to make that decision. That individual has to make that decision. You as caregivers can be there. You can be right next to them and ride with them the whole time and show them how much you love them, show them how much you care. But until they make that decision, you just have to be consistent and persistent, because eventually they will. My hope is that they will. There's so many different organizations out there in regards to, Joe alluded to, and I've actually had a chance to meet him since I moved out here to Colorado, the gentleman that does the fishing, and there's hiking groups here. There's so many different things out there. There's clergy who will meet with you if you're faith-based or if you're seeking that out. And then obviously, AA and NA if there's dependency there as well. And then, if you're dealing with, subjects like pornography and different things that are pretty dark and things that guys don't want to talk about, there's organizations out there that can deal with that. So I just encourage you to not only continue to find the traditional stuff, but also seek out some of those things that they might have done in the past that they really enjoyed and loved, and help them to find that joy again. I mean, I've said it earlier, but just activity. Idle hands. It's an ugly and dark thing. When we get isolated and we're by ourselves, it can be pretty dark. And so I would just encourage you to, and even if it's a walk around the block, it doesn't matter. As a caregiver, just encourage them. Don't hound them. Don't badger them. They're already got enough of that going on in their mind. But just be there and love them and be next to them.
Thank you, Eric. It's often theoretical, these discussions, so I really, really appreciate your personal experience. Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for this panel. We're so appreciative of Joseph Conrad, Jody Fry, and Eric Robinson for sharing your stories, your professional and personal expertise, and all your thoughts about supporting men's mental health. Thank you to everyone who watched live or will watch this recording. We hope this information empowers you, your loved ones, and your family. If you would like to keep learning with us, and we put lots of information in the chat here, please go to our website, for Families for Depression Awareness, familyaware.org, and sign up for our newsletter. You can follow this link on this slide to take our survey. Your feedback is really important. We look forward to hearing from you. And for all of us at Families for Depression Awareness, thank you very much.